I grew up in a town called Davis, California, and I moved up here in 1976, believe it or not. 3 weeks later, I went up on El Cap and got my ass spanked. But anyway, I was 17 years old. Anyway, so I've been up here for a long time, but I'd go back to Davis because my parents lived there. And I went to this rock climbing gym. There's this new thing called indoor climbing, and I actually had one of the first home gyms probably in the country, and it was down here in El Portal. And I made my own climbing holds, and so I went to this rock gym and gave them, and they bought some of these wooden climbing holds I made out of black walnut wood. And they're probably some of the best holds ever made. I still have some. They've been outdoors, and they're 25 years old, and they're still going strong. But at this gym, there's this young blonde girl that was kicking serious ass on the walls. I'm going, who the heck is that? I go, oh, her name's Beth. Beth Rodden. I go, whoa, she's going to go somewhere. So, anyway, it's my pleasure actually to introduce Beth Rodden, who I met over 20 years ago in Davis, California. We both grew up there. So, without further ado, here's Beth Rodden. Thank you very much.
I've been joking with Ken that I've totally avoided his request to speak at this event for the past 8 or 9 years. I always find Yosemite really intimidating, and for whatever reason, speaking here just seems super intimidating. So, but alas, he finally wore me down, and I'm gonna do a little show tonight. So, my show tonight is just kind of like on my life in climbing. Some adventures I've gone on, some trips, some highs and lows, and kind of where I am today. So I hope you guys enjoy. And afterwards, I think we do have time for a question and answer, so go ahead and do that. So like Ken said, I grew up in Davis, California. It's not too far from here. And as you can see, our highest point of elevation is our overpass. But luckily, there was a little teeny climbing gym there, and this was 20 years ago. There was probably a handful or a dozen of climbing gyms around the country, and fortunate for us, we had this rad little community gym in Davis, and I totally was psyched and became part of this like first generation of kid climbers that started climbing in the gyms. Along with myself, it was a pretty rad group of kids. That's me and Chris Sharma. When I think we were like 13 or 14 years old, on our way to France to compete in our first Junior World Cup. And it was this rad time because it was this group of like Chris and me and amazing people currently and that have been in the climbing community like Tommy and Katie Brown and Dave Hume, and kind of the list goes on. And we were these kids, and we loved climbing so much, and we wanted to just have it be the entire part of our lives. But we were competing and traveling around the country with our heroes that we see in climbing magazines, like Steve Hong and Robin Irvisfield and Francois Legrand and all these people. And this was kind of when sport climbing was like coming on in the center stage, and people took sport climbing so seriously. They would, eat lettuce for days to try and win a comp. They'd wear tight lycra and like shoestring harnesses. And then Chris would come out, and I remember this one time, this finals route, he was climbing out this roof, and his wallet and keys fall out of his bag and shorts. And so it was this time when we were coming onto this scene, and we totally were bringing this really young energy to it. And so my entire time in high school, I traveled around the country and the world doing these comps, and really got to know this group of people that we would compete with, and it was a pretty rad time for me. It made me realize that I wanted climbing part of my life. I didn't really know how to make it to be this professional climber or full-time climber. At the time, most full-time climbers lived in Europe, because if you wanted to be a professional climber, you kind of had to compete. And so at the end of my high school days, I was kind of at this crossroads. I was like, well, do I, take the, quintessential year off of college like everybody was doing, or do I go to college? And I grew up in a pretty traditional family. My parents were super supportive of my climbing. They drove me to every comp, or they'd fly with me to every comp. But at the end of the day, everybody in my family went to college and got a good job, got married, and had kids. So I wasn't quite brave enough to like take the leap into being a pro climber at that time. So I signed up for classes and I enrolled in UC Davis, and I lasted there an entire semester. During that entire semester, all I thought about was climbing. All I thought about was trips I wanted to do, climbs I wanted to go on, and in particular, I thought about this place, which is Smith Rock, up in Oregon. So during my school trips, the guys from the gym would drive me up there, and I totally got the bug for climbing outside, and I really loved it. And in particular, I wanted to try and do this route, which was to bolt or not to beat. It was this really iconic route for me at the time. You know, it's like the first 514 in America. My hero in climbing, Lynn Hill, was the first woman to do it the year before. And I just thought, man, if I can go up to Smith and really work hard and like do this 514 and do to bolt, then that'd be awesome. So I came up with this entire pitch to my parents that if they let me do this, that I'd get climbing out of my system, I'd become a weekend warrior. You know, I'd go back to school and they'd never have to worry about it again. They totally bought it. So the next month, I was like living my dream. You know, I was climbing full time, just hanging out, meeting people that were on the road. You know, I learned about like living out of your van, and it was pretty rad. And I set this lofty goal. You know, I think I'd only climbed like 512 before that, but I thought that if I could dedicate myself to climbing, that maybe I could climb this hard. And at the end of a month or two working on it, I was fortunate enough to do it. And at the time, I think I was maybe like the youngest woman to climb a 514, but now I'm pretty sure like 6 and 7-year-old girls climb 514. But I was pretty psyched. You know, I was like, oh, I worked hard towards something, and this was awesome. And even more impressive to me was at the time Lynn Hill owned a house just near Smith, and you know, this is when she was traveling all the time, going on these amazing expeditions and doing these incredible first ascents. And I got to know her like a little bit at the crag. She bladed me once or twice, of which I did terribly because, you know, I was like so nervous that Lynn Hill was blading me. But after I did it, lo and behold, like Lynn Hill threw me a pizza party to congratulate me, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And during the party, like she regaled us with like these amazing stories of like going to Thailand and free climbing the nose, and it was pretty rad. And at this time, I'm pretty sure bolt or not to me was like the highest I'd ever climbed. I think it's like 140 feet. I'd never placed a piece of gear in my life. I'd never traveled outside the country without my parents. And she was telling us about this trip that she was going on the next month to Madagascar with this all-women's crew, and they were like making this NBC TV show about it. I just thought, I was like, man, what a charmed life she lives. That is just incredible. And lo and behold, she invited me, you know, like I didn't even know what a cam was, you know, I'd like seen them over, you know, on Zebra Zion and been like, oh, those people are crazy, there's no bolts on that. But you know, like when Michael Jordan asks you to go shoot basketball with him, it's like, of course you're gonna say yes, you know, it's like, so Lynn Hill asked me to go to Madagascar, I didn't even know where Madagascar was. And I was like, sure, I'll go with you. So again, I like convinced my parents to let me like take another semester off of college, and instead of, you know, starting school, I woke up to these huge virgin granite walls in the Sarnar Massif in southern Madagascar. And at the time, I'm pretty sure we were like the second team to ever go to this climbing area, and now it's like littered with routes everywhere. But it was just like ours for the taking, and I was totally aghast, and I had no idea, you know, I didn't even understand, like, what do you do when you get to the top? Like, you just don't lower off any bolts. And so not only, like, did they have to teach me, like, how to actually get up the wall, like, Jumar and Hall, and they, you know, were like, you should probably not wear your sport climbing harness when you're, you know, on the big wall. But I tried to be like this sponge, because I was here with, like, these 3 incredible women, you know, Lynn, Nancy, and Kath, who all somehow or another had climbing as their careers or incorporated it like in their full-time life. And you know, like Lynn and Nancy were sponsored climbers, and they got to dream up these incredible adventures, and you know, got paid to go do it. And Kath ran this guiding company, and it was just, it seemed like such a dream to me that I thought, you know, if I really want to try and make it to be this full-time climber, I need to like learn from these women. And so they were super great, and they, you know, told me how they did it. and like all the ups and downs. And when I got home, I packed up my two-door Honda Civic and put a bunch of cans of soup from my parents' pantry into it, and I came to Yosemite Valley. Like probably most of you, like anybody who wants to learn how to actually trad climb knows that you come and try and cut your teeth in Yosemite. And so I spent like the next 2 or 3 seasons like living out of my little Honda Civic, meeting up with people at the cafeteria, trying to beg people to take like this little sport climbing girl up anything they would, trying to tell them that like I don't drink too much water, it won't be too much of a hassle. And finally, like I started pestering Hans Florine to take me up the nose. I started climbing the year that Lynn free climbed the nose, so everywhere I went, in every climbing gym, every comp was like that iconic poster of Lynn, you know, with her puffed up hair and her L'Oreal tank top with like "It Goes Boys," and I was just like, I want to see what that's all about. So I finally wore Hans down, and he agreed. He's like, okay, I'll take you up the nose, but like there's no bailing, there's no whining. And I quickly learned that 5'9" in Yosemite was not 5'13" in Smith Rock. So this is me leading off I think it's like, I forget how hard it is, that pitch off adult, like 5'9" wide thing. And I was not psyched. I was like, this is miserable. Why would anybody want to wall climb? It's so hard up here. It's windy, it's cold. Like climbing in these like awkward positions is just not fun. But I also learned about type 2 fun on my first time up El Cap. And by the time I got to the top, I was like, wow, that was really cool. Even though like 95% of the time I was like crying or had a scowl on my face. And somehow I forgot all about it. And a month later, I found myself on the left side of El Cap, this time partnered up with Tommy Caldwell, trying to free climb the route Lurking Fear. And for those of you who know Lurking Fear, you know it's like an incredible route. And Steve Schneider had put in like all this work and done amazing free climbing on it. And I think he just like couldn't free, you know, like a few moves or something on it. So he basically kind of paved the way for these 2 kids to come and try and climb this route. And I had met Tommy through the climbing comps, and so we knew each other. And he had free climbed the South, and this was back in 2000. So free climbing on El Cap was totally not popular. You know, Lynn had done her thing on the nose, Todd and Paul had done their thing on the South, Scotty Burke did his thing on the nose. And like the Hubers had put up like 1 or 2 routes, I think, and Leo might have put up 1 or 2 routes, but it was like pretty rare to see free climbing on El Cap. And so not only that, but we were also like starting this new relationship, which I think kind of like elevated us trying really hard to like impress each other. And we came across like some of the most amazing pitches that I've ever encountered in Yosemite. This is the 2nd or 3rd pitch, like one of the slab pitches, and you're just like climbing on these little dime-sized edges and like balancing your way up. And then some of the crack pitches are just, if these were on like the Valley Floor, I'm pretty sure they'd have like blinds on them every weekend because they're just some of the most amazing splitter climbs. And so we worked super hard for a month or 2 to try and free climb this route. And after that time, we were fortunate enough to be able to free climb this. And at the time, you know, since free climbing on El Cap was kind of this mythical thing, I was like, well, this route must not be that hard if I can do it. You know, it's just like, I'm not that good of a crack climber or Yosemite climber yet. But, you know, 15 years later, I'm pretty sure it has yet to see a second ascent. So we must have been doing something right. So it was a pretty cool time because Tommy, you know, was taking his, you know, year off college, and I was taking my last semester off of college. And we were totally like living our dreams, you know, like Tommy was living out of this van, I was living out of my Honda Civic, and we're just like living and breathing climbing. And the thing that was kind of missing was like this travel aspect. Tommy's dad was a mountain guide, so he kind of traveled the whole world with him when he was a kid. And the year prior, you know, I'd been fortunate enough to go on this trip with Lynn to Madagascar. And so next month, we dreamed up this trip with our friends, John Dickey and Jason Smith, who are also Valley locals, to go to this place called Kyrgyzstan and try and free climb these virgin granite walls, abroad and really incorporate that travel aspect to it. We had another North Face team go to the adjacent valley, the Aksu Valley, and we wanted to try and go to the Karasu Valley. And for those of you who don't know where Kyrgyzstan is, it's like one of those old Soviet Republic countries, and they got like divided up really, ambiguously and like fingers intertwining. And so we were like in this little valley that was like one of those fingers intertwining. And when we got there, it was everything we'd heard about and like so much more. It's these massive granite walls with these huge snowy peaks at the back of the valley with like this amazing river running through it. And it was pretty much paradise. We were going on this 6-week trip and we met the locals and like they brought us fresh yak butter and milk every morning and, would like stare at our cans in bewilderment, like what the heck are these, American foreigners doing here? But it was awesome, we were just like kids in this playground and had everything we ever wanted. And like two weeks into the trip, we were working on trying to free climb this route on one of the smaller walls called the Yellow Wall. And we decided that we were like ready to go for our 3-day push. So we hauled all of our stuff up there, and it happened to be Tommy's 21st birthday. So John and Jason like brought up a boombox, and I brought up some like freeze-dried pudding with an emergency candle. And I was just like, we were these kids. I think I was like 19 or 20, and John was the oldest one at the time. He was 25, and like we couldn't imagine anything better. We were just these kids living our dream. Unfortunately, the next morning, everything changed. We woke up to these super loud bangs, and we like all sat up in our sleeping bags and sucked it up against the wall. And we thought it was rockfall, like maybe we didn't put our portaledges somewhere good, and rockfall was coming down. And it happened again, and we looked down, and there were 4 armed men shooting up at us. And so we didn't really know what to do. We had zero idea what they wanted, and they started shooting again, and John was like, well, I'll wrap down, I'm the oldest, and I'll see what they want. Maybe they just want to rob us. He wrapped down, and he radioed up, and it was like super short that we all had to go back. We all had to wrap down. And I just remember this massive contrast of like, thinking that everything in life was amazing and climbing was everything, to all of a sudden just like my shirt was drenched in tears and like my hands were sweaty wrapping down to these guys who had like grenades on them and huge guns on them, and just being like, what is going on? And so for the next 6 days, we were held hostage by 4 captors and then eventually 1. And we had zero idea what they wanted with us. Like, they didn't speak English and we didn't speak their language. But it was apparent that we were supposed to do exactly what they wanted us to do. And we were basically just trounced around the mountains from hiding spot to hiding spot. We didn't get to have any jackets or sleeping bags, and we were at like 11 or 12,000 feet. We shoved a few bars in our pockets, so we were all starving and scared. We went through this firefight with the Kyrgyzstan military where there's like mortars, and we saw them kill Kyrgyz military, and we had to sit next to like the dead body of one of the other captors. And during the day, they would shove us in these hiding spots where you'd never think like a person could fit. It was, maybe you could fit like a cat or a squirrel in there, and they just shoved us in these like boulder spots and covered us with pine boughs. And the entire time this was happening, I never once thought about climbing. All I thought about was my parents and wanting to go back and just like lead a simple, really safe life. And just be like, I was completely terrified. At the end of the 6th night, not only were we starving, but they were starving as well. And so the kind of head captor, decided that he was going to walk back to our camp and try and get us some more food. And we were supposed to meet him on top of this ridge. And once we started climbing this ridge, it was super apparent that we were totally comfortable. I mean, we're all professional climbers, and it would be anything that anyone here would be totally comfortable on. It was like grassy ledges to 5-1 or 5-2, and grassy ledges to 5-1 or 5-2. But our captor, Sue, as we knew him, was completely uncomfortable. He was asking us for help. He was like handing us his gun. He was handing us his hand, trying to help him up. And And so at the top, there became this like opportunity to maybe escape. And the entire time that we were there, I never wanted to try and escape because I was like, man, I can suffer with the best of them. And if we do something wrong, they're just going to kill us like we've seen them kill people. But at the top, we were all kind of reaching our breaking point, and Tommy climbed up behind this guy and pulled him off, and we saw him hit a ledge and then fall out of sight. And so at that point, we knew that we had to like get out of there because maybe the other captor was coming. And so we ran down valley to this place where we knew there was a military base. And it was just like immediately once we started running, we had so much energy. Like adrenaline is an incredible thing. We hadn't eaten more than 200 calories in 6 days. And, but we ran so fast to this military base. And right before the military base, we started to get shot at again. And this time there was like no trees, no boulders to hide behind, so we just dove in the ground behind these little bushes. And it happened to be the Kurgis military, and they thought that we were more rebels. And once we got across the point that we were Americans, they let us in, and at that point we knew we were safe. And so from then we went from one military base to another military base, eventually to the United States Embassy in Bishkek, and then eventually we got home. And when we got home, it's not what we wanted. It was like this media firestorm, this like barrage of media. And this was kind of like right when the internet was coming out, but not really in full force. And so it was like these newspaper reporters coming to my parents' door and they're like bringing us exotic fruit baskets and like trying to get our story. And it was like this other level of like dealing with stuff. Not only did we have to like deal with, just being held hostage for 6 days and almost dying, but it was pretty intense. All I wanted to do was like crawl into a hole and like get a security system at my parents' house and never ever leave. And eventually we collaborated with fellow climber Greg Child, and he wrote a book about it, which totally like quelled that part of it. People stopped asking us about it. People stopped, wanting to know our story. But it left me in this super hard position because it seemed like the boys just like jumped back into their lives. Like Tommy had all these climbing projects that he just dove back into. We drove here, I think a month and a half after Kyrgyzstan, and like tried to free the mirror wall, and like John went into his photography career, and Jason moved to Central Asia because he really wanted to, and I was in this position where I was like, man, I've like really made all these sacrifices to try and be this professional climber, and my boyfriend Tommy is this professional climber. I was like, well, maybe that's what I should do. And so I went out every day and I tried to climb and I tried to set these like lofty goals, but I totally failed at it. Like I was this professional climber that was totally scared to climb. I was scared to be cold because it reminded me of Kyrgyzstan. I gained all this weight because I was scared to be hungry. I was scared of the dark. And so I was like in this point where I was like, why should I even go climbing anymore? But I decided that, I've totally used my body to, work through things. It's like what all athletes do, right? It's just like you get on the horse and you like get back on. And so I decided that I couldn't like set LCAT free climbing goals again like Tommy, but maybe I'd try and go climb a pitch in the snow, and then maybe I'd try and climb like 3 pitches, and then maybe I'd like, try and work up to it. And so over the next like 2 or 3 years, I was super patient with myself, and eventually like made it back here to Yosemite and started setting like loftier and loftier goals, and just like really remembered, like I really like that goal setting aspect of climbing. You set something that you never think's possible, and like you work really hard to achieve it. And so after a few years, I was like, oh, climbing's really fun, and I love it, and I kind of like got over this hump and really loved it again. And so I thought, what better place to go than set like the loftiest goal of all, which was to try and repeat Lynn's amazing ascent and try and free climb the nose of El Cap. And Tommy and I had like always had the idea to try and free climb El Cap. I mean, who doesn't have the idea to like free climb the nose? It's like anything that ever happens in climbing, like the nose, it's like everybody hears about. And so, but we always came up with these excuses like, oh, it's too crowded, and it's kind of wet this year, I just don't know what's going to happen. And finally we're like, you know what, those excuses are always going to be there. It's just going to get more crowded. It's just going to always be wet in the spring. And we decided that we were just going to like embrace that stuff. And so we found out that, yeah, it was definitely crowded on the nose. Coming here, we worked on it, I think, for like a month, and I'm pretty sure we came across like 30 to 40 parties in a month. And anywhere from like people that flew in, just, for 6 days to the States and then drove up here from San Francisco and they were like, did the nose and then drove home. And to these people who were the most memorable people we met, this is team of Brazilians, and they were like the super charismatic people. And they came to Yosemite 6 months prior. They didn't even know how to climb the Nutcracker, and they were like, we're gonna climb the nose one day. And so, like, come hell or high water. And so we came across these people, this group, like 4 or 5 times, because like when you're free climbing, like you route down, you climb up, and so we just saw them all the time. And sure enough, like at the end of their stint in Yosemite, they succeeded in this 5-day ascent of the nose. And it was rad. And they ran out of food and water. They slept in slings 2 nights, which I don't understand because they had a portaledge, but they still did it. And it was so impressive, and I was like, man, I realized that I bail way too easily because these guys had their hearts in it. And so after a month of working on it, Tommy and I went for a 4-day push of swapping leads of trying to repeat Lynn and Scotty's amazing ascent of the nose, and we did it, and it was super incredible for me because I had memorized Lynn's free climbing the nose video so many times. I'd watched it, I was like, I remember where her nut fell out on the changing corners pitch, and I remember that she wore cutoff jean shorts and Boreal Mambas. And I remember being up there and being like, how can she be free climbing this in Boreal Mambas? But it was pretty rad. And for me, it was kind of like this peak. I was just like, wow, I never thought I could free climb the nose, and here I am, and I just did this. And for all of you that have climbed El Cap or big walls, it's like, it kind of wears you down mentally. At least it does for me. And so after doing that, I was like, man, I need a break from climbing on El Cap, because when I forget that the can of soup is at the bottom of the haul bag and it takes me 20 minutes to unpack it, it's like, I just want my can of soup. So I was like, well, there's this whole valley with all these rock climbs, and all these heroes of mine have put up these amazing ascents, and maybe I'll just go around and try and repeat some of these one-pitch climbs around the valley. And so I got to go and try these incredible climbs like Book of Hate that Randy Levitt put up. And I did this for a couple seasons, just going around, and it was nice to sleep in a bed at night and eat hot oatmeal and stuff like that. But at the end of these couple seasons, it all culminated with me kind of beating my head against the wall of this old Roncal project that's not far from the road in Upper Cascade Creek. So this next little bit is a video about that. For the last 5 months, I've been working on a climb in Upper Cascade Creek. There's a waterfall right next to the climb, and it makes this little pool right at the base of the route. It's an old Ron Kaup project. I think he put in the anchor bolts about 10 years ago. When I started climbing on the route, it felt impossible. I only climbed 1 out of every 10 moves, and what struck me right away was the feet were just terrible. The waterfall has polished some of the footholds, so they're very slick. I just kept telling myself to trust the feet. Stopping and trying to place the gear, I soon realized it was going to be very difficult. It's very specific, and you have to work it into the sequence of the climbing. Every second counted when I was on the route. So I came up with the idea one day to duct tape certain key placements on my harness. So all I would have to do is yank it off and stick it right in the crack. So it saved me, seconds on each placement, and that made a big difference. This was definitely the most time I've ever spent on a single pitch. I climbed on this route probably about 40 to 45 days over a 5-month period. Towards the end, spring started to come, so the snowpack from the high mountains started to melt. The waterfall got bigger, and the spray from the waterfall was making the bottom of the route more and more wet. each day the spray got a little closer and the pool got a little higher. I definitely felt like the countdown was on.
So we're just extending one.
crux of the root starts about 20 feet up. I get this bad right hand pinch that I move my feet up onto one of the worst footholds on the root. And then I'm able to stab for this half digit, 2-finger lock. The gear is not quite as good as you'd like it to be. You're never quite sure if you placed it correctly or if it's going to hold. I really had to focus on the moves and the hard climbing and trying not to worry if the gear was going to pop or hold me. Things that I feel like are impossible. And so I had this whole list of other things that I wanted to start doing. And unfortunately, like once I started diving into that, my body started to break down. And added on top of that, at the same time, my marriage to Tommy started to break down. And I thought that I was in a hard space after Kyrgyzstan, but this definitely was like the hardest and darkest time for me. Here I was this professional climber, and like my entire life I'd use my body to kind of like work through things. And every time I tried to use my body, like something else would happen. I'd pop a pulley, or like I'd re-injure my shoulder, or I'd break my ankle. And I just didn't know how to do it. I was like, what do I do if I can't go out and set these huge goals? And what do I do if I can't live this lifestyle of like projecting and, you know, gaining fame this way? And add on top of that, like now I don't have my, you know, best friend and my partner. And I started, you know, honestly being like asking myself, is it worth like the anguish and not being able to do this? And I started researching, you know, jobs that don't require a college degree and what can I actually do in life. And then the stubborn part of me kind of came out again and was like, you know, do you really want to give up that easily on this life that has given you so much, that has, you know, let you travel the world, that has introduced you to, you know, your best friends? But I was like, I can't go climbing, I can't do anything. And so I started to really try and like break it down. I was like, well, I'll just start to go on hikes and climb domes in Yosemite. And up until that point, like my entire social circle, like I was married to arguably the most prolific, you know, big wall free climber at the time, and I was arguably one of the best, you know, female free climbers. And my entire social circle was professional climbers, and you know, I was like too embarrassed. I couldn't go climbing with any of my friends, and so I started going out and climbing with like my neighbors and going on things that, you know, I would never climb before. You know, this is Arrowhead Arret. And I realized, I was like, man, this is like really fun if you go climbing with 5'6" and 5'7". And wow, these other friends that I have that don't climb 5'14", like they have a lot of fun climbing too. And you know, after a couple years of doing that, I think the injuries gave me one of the greatest gifts of all, which is like I have this smile now, and I realize that if I climb to the top of my 514 project, or if I climb like some easy ridge with my friends in Tuolumne, and I'm not sure I would have gotten there. You know, I have so many peers that like once they climb hard, they can't climb hard, they just stop, or like they're lost, because it's this kind of addicting thing to be able to go out and like keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but sometimes you can't do that. And so I'm like super appreciative to the injuries now, because I realize that like climbing gives so many different things to so many different people, and I realize that like I can't shake climbing from me. It's like totally woven into me. If I can climb 5'6" or if I can climb 5'14", I'm gonna be climbing. And so that leads me to where I am today, which is I'm a mom to our little boy Theo, who's 2 now. And for the past couple years, I've been trying to spend as much time with him as possible, like in this place, Yosemite, that is my favorite place on earth, and just show him like all the wonders of our natural world. And I totally realize that even if he never takes to this climbing lifestyle, that I hope that this time in his early years spent outside, you know, teaches him to at least respect and try and preserve all these places that mean so much to me. And probably above all else, if there's like one lesson from climbing that I could pass on to him, it would be the power of having like a passion in life. And probably above that, to be able to see the beauty of that passion regardless of ups and downs. So thanks. So Steve's question was, what was the hardest climb I'd done before Boulder Knot B? I think it was either Kings of Rap or Time's Up, so 12B or 13A or something like that. Yeah. I wasn't good at red pointing, so I was like, I didn't know how to do that, but I learned that up there. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Ben. Hi, Ben.
So what's it like to watch yourself doing that meltdown now? That's like a pretty outrageous achievement.
Yeah.
Just to watch yourself on the screen must be awesome. So.
Yeah. So the question was, what's it like to watch doing Meltdown? I don't know. Yeah, it's cool. I'm like, wow, that's great.
Almost like thank God.
What's that?
Almost like thank God.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a relief to finally cut those chains.
Man.
Yeah.
Those last Sportivas when you did Meltdown looked pretty fresh. Were those like right out of the box?
Yeah, my shoes were pretty brand new when I did Meltdown, for sure. Needed that. Yep.
Have you been, or would you consider going back to Kyrgyzstan?
I had never considered going back to Kyrgyzstan. No, I'm good. I'm sure it's lovely, but I'm good. Maybe after like years of therapy, I could go back. Yeah.
So you didn't want to do this talk for 5 or 8 years. Was it a catharsis for you? Did you enjoy it? Did you get the release? Is it good for you? We enjoyed it.
Thank you. I mean, I was like pretty darn nervous. I'm pretty sure I peed like 4 times. But I mean, it's good for me, right? It's like one of those things. Like, I gotta do this. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have a grandson that's 5 years old, and he won't go above 7 feet on my climbing wall, my garage.
Yeah.
So how did you get your son to go way up there?
Yeah. You know, we haven't done anything with Theo. Like, I just kind of like let him do it. You know, I figure that I don't really want to push him. If he wants to do it, that's awesome.
That's what we're doing. We're
Yeah. So,
encouraging.
yeah, he'll come around if he wants, I guess. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the last 3 years, I think the only other personal display of emotion was Shane Lamprey. And what he did in talking about what he went through was huge. And what you shared with us tonight was huge. And I just want to thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Beth. That was super inspiring. You did a great job. You have nothing to fear. You did a great show. Guys, enjoy the shows.